Hi, everyone. It is Pastor Cathy, and we are here with Kaitlin Curtice. She is the author of Native. What's the subtitle? What's the subtitle? Identity, Belonging, and
Rediscovering God.
And Rediscovering God. It's an excellent book that I'm here with Lindsay O'Connor as well from our church. We agreed to interview Kaitlin, but Lindsay recommended the book as we continue our talk about belonging and the yard signs that we have, that we belong to each other. And it's just a great opportunity to interview and to talk more about the book as we have a book discussion in the works for the next day or two. So thank you, Kaitlin. We really appreciate this and this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why don't you go ahead and tell people about yourself and what it is that brought you to write this particular book.
Yeah, so I was born in Oklahoma, and like you'll find out in the book, I'm a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, and so grew up with, a father who's Potawatomi. My mother is of European descent, so I'm what I call mixed culture or mixed ethnicity. And so, grew up, my father worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and so we grew up going to church, but also, living around other Indigenous people, but sort of being disconnected from that. And when I was 9 years old, my father left our family and my parents got divorced. And so it was kind of this disconnect for me. And the church, especially the Southern Baptist Church, just became my safe place. And it was just where I went, it was with everything. And it was a good experience. I had an amazing church, amazing friends and leaders. Like they're people that I dearly loved, that loved me. But what we do as adults then is we look back and think, is that what we thought it was? So I had that process. And I think that when I was actually writing Glory Happening, which is my first book, I was just starting to deconstruct at that time. I was just starting to kind of expand my views of God and ask questions, but I didn't quite have the language for it yet. And so I think that, for me, Native was just kind of the next step after just beginning to kind of say, okay, I've started deconstructing. How can I now decolonize, which is just the language I have for it, is how can I actually examine, systems of colonization that I have participated in or that the church has participated in. How can we do this work together? And just coming into more fullness of my identity and integrating all the parts of myself and trying to be honest about it in hopes that other people can be honest too, that I can help them do that. So I didn't plan for this book to come. It just did, it just was the next part of my life. And I'm a writer. So, I process through writing, and that's what I do. That's my work. So it just sort of happened,
So your hope for people for this book, what's your hope that they're able to
I just I know that it's been a really diverse set of people who have ended up reading it from what I've seen online, and I'm really grateful for that, because the whole power of storytelling is that I can tell you about my life, and it's not the same as yours, but you can get something from those stories and experiences. And I wanted a book that could invite people in, but also allow them to have hard conversations with themselves and with others, so that change is possible and we're being honest about it, and that we can actually also get hope from that. And so it's a hard process, but I think it's a needed process, and it can be a beautiful process as well.
Yeah. And it's work.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't just fall into it.
No. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Lindsay, what do you have questions?
One of the things that I was so interested in your book is that you refer to God or the divine as mystery with a capital M. And so we were wondering if you could talk about just your understanding of God as mystery.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, when I first started writing Glory Happening, my first book, that was the first time I started calling God mystery instead of like Father, or, I had very masculine pronouns for God, of course, because it's a very patriarchal religion that we're given a lot of the time. So the only way I knew God was this, kind of judge, like man, old man, judge. And that's all I knew. And so when I realized that even within the Christian tradition, there is a wider view of God besides the kind of evangelical, conservative, white patriarchy that I grew up with. Like, there's a wider vision of God. And then when I started learning my tribe stories and learning about our traditions, that expanded it even more. And for me, it was very freeing. I know for a lot of people, when you grow up with very defined boxes of who God is and what God is, it can be scary to leave that. And for a long time, I think it was scary for me to leave that. But once you do leave it and you realize that there are these wider understandings of mystery or God or what is sacred, I find that really beautiful and hopeful. Like that helps me to find my place in the world. And I know that it doesn't feel that way for everyone, but I know a lot of us who are sort of deconstructing our faith, our childhood faith, or what we grew up with, that's a very freeing thing to kind of let go and know that maybe there's more than we thought there was. And so mystery with a capital M, it's just my way of sort of encompassing all of it and also letting it be open enough that we don't really know. It's like a lot of questions left there.
It's almost like a spiritual practice, just thinking of it as mystery instead of a particular image.
Yeah. And, I spoke at Baylor University earlier this year, and there was a confusion that happened where I had used one of my prayers from Glory Happening, and they thought that I had prayed to Mother Mystery, which of course really offended them. But then I thought, I really love that. So I started using it more and more because I recognized that that's a really beautiful way to think of this divine feminine sort of idea of the sacred, or whatever you want to call it. So Mother Mystery is also something I've started using, since writing Native, is just another way of thinking about that and widening, our ideas and our lens.
Yeah. Lindsay, anything you want to add to that?
That resonates a lot with me, because that's been a part of my kind of reconstruction process. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of people in our congregation that, especially as a woman, I didn't realize how affected I was by that view of God as being so masculine. So that's right. Really beautiful.
Lindsay, go ahead and pick up the theme that we're talking about here, the decolonization and the deconstruction and reconstruction and all of that, and ask that question that you and I talked about.
Okay, so our congregation has quite a few people who have left other churches, especially white evangelical churches, and are deconstructing or reconstructing, or somewhere in that process.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to hear more about decolonization and how that is an important part. And in your book, you talk about, I really love how inclusive your book is. I felt like it makes a place for everyone, whether your heritage is from a colonizer or the other side or some mixture, or wherever you are, there's a place for that. So can you talk about why decolonization is important and also why it's beneficial for everyone, not just the people who were colonized? Yeah.
I'm so grateful to hear you say that it felt like, everyone was invited in, because I really wanted to do that. And I wasn't sure if it was possible to do that. But I'm grateful to hear that from different sorts of people, that they felt like they could enter into that space. That means so much to me. I wanted to frame decolonization as an invitation, because we have these terms. Well, decolonization is new to a lot of people. It's not a term. I didn't grow up with it. So it's fairly new to me, but it's so powerful. And of course it has sort of an academic term. It's an academic term, but I also want to use it for like our everyday life, especially if, what we're in right now in America. This is another time, but this is the time to decolonize and to ask, deconstruction's sort of, in my mind, deconstruction's like beginning the process of looking back and sort of examining. And then decolonization is like that next step of saying, okay, if I've actually participated in these systems of colonization, because we live in America is a colonized nation. Like we can't live here and not be affected in some way by that and not be complicit in some ways. Like I have to decolonize all parts of myself, all sides of myself. And we are all invited into that work. And so I want people to see it as, we enter into this decolonizing work for the sake of all of us. It's for all of us to be more whole and more healthy. And I know it's scary, it's scary to think of it that way, but it's really important. And so I wanted to frame it in a way that people could ask, how can decolonization be a part of my journey and be a part of my story? And the reconstruction part, I get to it a little in the book, but I feel like even for me, I'm still asking, what, especially in the case of the church as a whole, like, what do I want for the church? I think I'm still in my decolonization, and honestly, in my grieving still of what the church should be and what it's not. I'm still trying to ask those questions. What should the church be? And, and so I'm grateful that you all have a space where you are asking those questions together, because we know that many churches aren't a safe place to ask those questions,
Yeah.
And it's important that we get to.
Well, I think it's important too, in this particular time and place, there is a lot of focus appropriately on how we've been complicit in the lives of racism and other harmful practices. And I really enjoyed reading this book in the midst of what's going on right now, because it gave me the perspective I needed to be able to see other oppressed and colonized in that same light. It just gave me a new perspective to view it from. So I'm very thankful for it. But our church is, we have lots of discussion, lots of questions, but we also have a very strong spiritual practices liturgical side to us. And some of the stories you shared were similar to a lot of spiritual practices that we have. And I'm thinking especially of your trip to New Mexico, and the part where you left and you thanked the land, and you thanked the rocks, and you thanked the sky. And I think in Wesleyan theology, we would call that a means of grace. We would call that you acknowledge the grace that was around you, that we received grace through creation, and it's very appropriate to be grateful for that gift. And it also reminded me of our senior pastor, Blair, did her doctoral dissertation, her doctoral work on pilgrimage as a means of grace. And so a lot of this was resonating with me. So I'm just curious if you could talk through that, talk about that some, about recognition of the land and creation, how that's a spiritual practice for you.
Yeah. And I write about this in the book, but when I was young, I felt very connected to the land, and I think as children, we have this natural curiosity and spiritual presence with the land and with water and with the world around us, with animals, and I think that part of colonization is actually that we lose the connection to we start to think of the land as a commodity, or we start to think of water as a commodity, capitalism and just our society, our Western ways of thinking, we adopt those ways of understanding the world. And then over time, we lose this beautiful connection, this existence with the land, this kinship, right? And so for me, coming back to that as an adult has been so meaningful, because it's actually connected me back to my childlikeness in a way, and my curiosity and my humility. I think that we don't like feeling humble, or we don't like saying that we're small. And to me, like saying, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to sit by the water, or I'm going to sit under these trees and I'm going to let them remind me of how small I am, and remind me that I belong to them, that this is our relationship. In Western thought, that's really scary for us to think that way. But I think that thinking that way will help heal some of the damage that we have done, and help heal our relationship to the earth, and then heal our relationship to each other. And it's all spiritual, it's all connected. I tell everyone to read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is a book that you all should read together sometime as well. And it's just, she teaches this idea of kinship, of recognizing the creatures of this earth and the earth herself as sacred, as a partner in a relationship. And that's a lot of unlearning to do, because growing up Baptist, there was no talk. There was just the, what is it? Like to dominate, you take dominion, right? So that was as far as we went with it. And so it's a lot of unlearning and then relearning how to connect back to the earth. But, the earth is always there, ready for us, it seems. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing, that we can find our way home in a way to her, and then learn to care for her better than we have, and to make, to repair that relationship, to make apologies, and to try to figure out, again, how we're complicit in these systems that have hurt the earth and the creatures around us. And I think that's all spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah. And we agree with that. At least I do anyway. And you mentioned something about how we belong to the earth, we belong to the land, and we belong to each other, which coincidentally is Arapahoe's yard sign that we had when we all of a sudden had to leave our buildings, the place of comfort that we have, and go back home and do everything online. And I was, just very loosely equating it to some of the concept that you have, that you refer to in the book about the 7 fires, 7 generations, almost like a circle of life kind of thing. And I just think, just in what I've read about it, it's a little fascinating. I was hoping that you'd talk about that a little bit, just to let people know what that's about.
Yeah. So our 7 fires prophecies is basically like the story of our people. And, we're coming, when you get to the end, it's kind of this time when we're being given this choice to make. Are we going to, in a way, are we going to continue to choose colonization? Are we going to continue to choose this way of life that is hurt and harmed so many of us? Or are we going to choose something different? Are we going to return to the earth, return to ourselves, return to each other, decolonize? And it's kind of like, we're given this choice to make, and it's a really important one. And I think I've been thinking about, like you said, how timely my book has been with COVID, and now with this racism and the anti-Blackness that we're all seeing, that's always been there, but that we're talking about it right now, and police abuse and violence. And my book is, I'm talking about, who are we going to be on the other side of catastrophe? Or who are we going to be in the midst of all of this? What choice are we going to make? And, ever since COVID started, all through this, it's been like, are we going to keep choosing this like rugged individualism that America has created? Or are we going to choose this collective communal belonging? And those are very opposed, those are very different ways of living. And what are we going to choose? And I think that our people's prophecy and those stories also speak to that choice that we need to make. And yeah, are we going to choose to belong to one another? And that belonging, that's like it's not like a light-hearted belonging. It's like we are going to be in this together, and we're not going to give up. And it's going to take our whole life to do this work. It's going to take our whole life together to fight against these systems of oppression. It's lifelong work, and it's good work.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and I just think it's just so important that that we recognize. In fact, Wesleyan theology is what we gravitate towards in the Methodist Church, and the very first rule of John Wesley of his general rules is do no harm. And so as we start to look about what it looks like to get back into that environment, how do we do that without doing harm to each other?
Yeah.
Or doing harm to anyone around us or the community or anything else, because that's part of the, we have to resist that urge even. So Lindsay, I've taken a lot of time, but I know you've got a couple more questions. What you want to jump in?
Let me ask one more quick one. I want to honor your time. But earlier you were talking about kind of reconnecting with a childlike way of being, and then later, toward the end of the book, you talk about the need for us to listen to our children. So I was wondering if you could share about what that looks like for you, to be learning and listening from our children.
Yeah. Sorry. My dog is
That's yours.
very
Okay.
loud. Sorry. He's not going to stop, so I'm just going to keep going. My family's all outside, so he's like, what are you doing? You know, he's looking at them through the window. Yeah, I started writing when my first son was born, and I knew that I would need an outlet, so I started a blog, but, it was also just like basically sharing what my children were teaching me. It was like I was just the receiver of all of these lessons all the time, and I think that the children around us, whether we're parents or we are just in proximity to children, if we're teachers, if we're caregivers, we are all around children, we're all around young people who are teaching us. And right now, our young people are leading the way in so many things. They're the next generation, they're the ones that will carry on this work and start their own work. And, my kids, even over the last few weeks, have just been so responsive to some of these conversations, the anti-racism conversations we're having as Indigenous people who have white privilege. We're trying to talk about all of the complexities of this, and they're, one of them will, after we're done talking, will go make a sign that's like, end police brutality, or some sign that's like, police stop hurting people. They're processing that way. And then we have another child who prays for people. So in the evening, he'll ask me, like, who is hurting? Who should I be praying for? And then we name people who have been shot by police, and we name their families, and we name our friends who are, we name these things out loud, and then he prays. And so it's like they're just running with everything. You give them a little bit, and they respond in whatever way they are called to respond. And I just think that it's such a beautiful and motivating way for us to know that we need to keep doing this work, because they are listening. Mm-hmm. They're listening, and then they're listening to themselves, and they're responding like back into the world. They're naming these things, and they're creating, and I just think that it's so important for us to hear and see the way that they're doing that, so that when we're gone, they're going to keep doing their work, right. and we just have to be there to help them keep going with it. We don't want to hinder them from doing what they need to do in the world.
Lindsay, does that resonate with you?
It does. I am being interrupted by one of my little children right now. What?
Hi, Jane.
You can pick something, okay? It's all about snacks all the time.
Oh,
yeah.
Anyway, I think that, what? Okay. Sorry. I think it's so beautiful, and it also has me thinking a lot about, especially a lot of other white parents I talk to when I share book lists, or we talk about how do we talk about anti-Blackness or racism with our children. I think a lot of white parents who have not had to have those conversations feel intimidated, and they feel like it's too much for their children. And what I have seen in the little bit that we have done with our children is that it really makes them feel empowered, mm-hmm. that they can be awake to a problem, but also feel like, as you were saying, they can respond in the ways that they have been gifted to do. So I really appreciate that perspective as a way to especially help our white parents to see it as a way to empower our children and let them feel awake, but also hopeful.
Yeah. And I think there's always this hard, like, how much do I share with my kids? All of us, like, how much do we tell them? How, you don't want to traumatize your kids, but you need to let them know what's happening so that they can shape their future. And I just think it's important and I write this in the book too, it's important for our kids to see us angry about an injustice, mm-hmm. to see us like raging and being upset, because they need to, and then to take that, and for us to be funneling that into whatever creative energy we need to be using it to do something. Like, we have to not, we can't just hide those things from them, because they need to see us. They need to see us processing this and saying, kids, I made a mistake. This is my mistake. This is what I'm learning right now. I don't want you to have to learn this when you're older. You need to know it right now. And we need to be doing this work right now. Like, to frame it again, like decolonization, to frame this work as an invitation, and to know that it will take a long time, and that it won't, It doesn't mean we're perfect right away, but it means that we have to be doing it together, and we can step into that work together, and that it's necessary, and our kids they'll be ready when we do.
Yeah. And that's why it's a journey. We don't, it's not a destination place. It's a learning process and a journey. And so, I have older kids, but I'm remembering, and even now that, Jack comes in and says, Mom, when are we going to talk about this? Like, oh yeah, we still do that. So you've been great, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope, gosh, best success with your move and with the book, and we'll look forward to the next one. And if you're ever in the Dallas area, let us know. We'd love for you to come and speak to our church in some way and talk even more.
Yeah, I'd love that.
All right. Super.
Thank you